potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists.
The very word secrecy is repugnant in a free and open society.
President Bush signed a formal agreement that will end the United States as we know it. And he took the step without approval from either the U.S. Congress or the people of the United States.
CNN has even reported that these individuals have put out the policy reports through the Council on Foreign Relations that writes their scholarly white papers to end the United States.
See the president of the CFR, Richard N. Haas, followed by Vice Chairman of Rothschild Europe, Franco Barnaby, who is speaking with Henry Kravitz, and behind him is Richard Holbrooke, former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. Erected by a secretive group, the Georgia Guidestones are a testament to the elite's plan for a world religion, global laws, with a global court and army to enforce it. And set in stone, it is written that the population never rise above 500 million.
The year is 1917, and Representative Oscar Callaway enters a disturbing statement into the U.S. Congressional Record. The statement reveals why J.P. Morgan interests hired 12 high-ranking news managers. The 12 were asked to determine the most influential newspapers in America. They were to figure out how many news organizations it would take to control generally the policy of the daily press of the United States. The 12 found it was only necessary to purchase the control of 25 of the greatest papers. An agreement was reached. The policy of the papers was bought, and an editor was placed at each paper to ensure that all published information was in keeping with the new policy. Soon, that policy would be defined by a front group formed by J.P. Morgan and his colleagues. In fact, Morgan's personal attorney was founding president of the organization, the Council on Foreign Relations. Today, the CFR maintains that its goal is to increase America's understanding of the world. However, the actual objective of this highly exclusive club is revealed by the rare admissions of the insiders themselves. In the early 60s, a Georgetown University professor collects information for a book favorable to the network of powerful men who founded the CFR. For 2 years, Professor Carroll Quigley is allowed to examine the confidential papers and secret records of this network. Quigley reveals that these men aim to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. In short, they seek total and quiet control of the entire world. And the CFR is their most visible conduit for carrying out that agenda.
The Council on Foreign Relations resulted from the United States refusal, the United States Senate refusal to get in the League of Nations. The architect of the entire Wilson administration was Edward Mandell House. House was a Marxist. He'd written a book in 1912 where he actually said
Philip Drew, administrator.
He was working for socialism as dreamed of by Karl Marx. He hated the Constitution. He wanted to reunite the United States with England and so forth. So he was in favor of the income tax. We got it. He was in favor of the Federal Reserve. We got it. He was in favor of a lot of things that we got. And Wilson thought he was the architect of it, but he wasn't. But anyhow, 1919, the Senate said no to the League of Nations, and House was in Paris at the time. He got a cable about that, so they got together with British counterparts, House and his young lieutenants.
Royal Institute of International Affairs.
Out of it came the Royal Institute for International Affairs. The American branch of it is the Council on Foreign Relations. Interesting is House's lieutenants, John Foster Dulles, Allen Dulles, Sumner Wells, Walter Lippmann, Christian Herter, and several others who became very prominent in our country. So the Council on Foreign Relations began, and its purpose was to convince the American public of the need for world government. They wanted the League of Nations as a world government. The U.S. never got involved, and so it never really went anywhere. Well, very soon they started getting funding from the Rockefeller Foundation and the Carnegie people and others, and then they began to have more influence. They would invite people to come. You can't go and ask to join the Council on Foreign Relations. You have to be tapped, and if you're tapped, you get a five-year membership sometimes, and then at the end of 5, you either get re-upped or you get cast adrift. Franklin Roosevelt invited a contingent of the Council on Foreign Relations to come into the State Department in the late 1930s. They took control of it, and the CFR has dominated the State Department ever since. You could go back over all of the secretaries of state since the Truman administration, and you can say every single one of them was a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. This is where you find the movers and shakers of America. This is, we call them the insiders. What are they inside? Well, they're inside a cabal, a conspiracy, if you will, to take control of the United States, lead us into a one-world government run by them. Right, Tragedy and Hope by Dr. Carroll Quigley.
And Quigley,
professor at Georgetown University.
Quigley talked candidly in that book about the role of the insiders.
Well, he talked about the fact that there was a conspiracy of sorts that began with Cecil Rhodes in the late 1800s, and its culmination became the Royal Institute for International Affairs in England and the Council on Foreign Relations in the United States.
And now we have Rhodes Scholars who are carefully selected to play key roles of leadership in the governance of their nations.
We're talking about conspiracy. You're not supposed to use that word today. You can have a Watergate conspiracy, you can have a mafia conspiracy, and so forth. Well, what about a conspiracy to rule the world? What is a conspiracy? What does the word mean? All right, take it apart. Conspiro, together, breathe together, and it's adopted a sinister meaning, and it means more than one person, secrecy, and evil. That's all it is. That's a conspiracy. All right. I believe that people who are anxiously working to undermine the independence, the sovereignty of the United States, destroy the economic system of our country, lead us into a one-world government, and I believe that that's a conspiracy.
Why did we give the Soviets Berlin?
Well, because the Soviets were, in fact, the conspiracy's way of taking control of the world for a time, and it didn't work, and so they went to Plan B, and then they went to Plan C, and Plan D, if you want to call it now, is the North American Union.
CFR members include America's wealthiest tycoons, as well as the highly placed elite in government, academic institutions, tax-exempt foundations, and the establishment media. Ruling Class Journalists, written by Richard Harwood, describes the CFR membership as the ruling establishment in the United States. The Washington Post article boasted that news reporters who are CFR members do not merely analyze and interpret foreign policy for the United States, they help make it. Many of their faces are familiar. NBC's Tom Brokaw, CBS's Dan Rather, ABC's Barbara Walters, Jim Lehrer of PBS, William F. Buckley of National Review, media mogul Rupert Murdoch, owner of the giant multifaceted News Corporation. These media heavyweights, and many others like them, are members of the CFR. In 1995, CFR members Michael Eisner of Disney and ABC's Thomas Murphy merged their media empires. Soon after the merger, the Disney-ABC empire becomes a CFR corporate member. In the year 2000, the world's largest internet service provider, America Online, joins forces with Time Warner, one of the world's largest news organizations. The CEOs favoring the move are CNN's Thomas Johnson and Time Warner's Gerald Levin, both CFR members. Once again, another media giant is created under the shadow of CFR influence.